On this week's episode of the I-501C, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I have the pleasure of interviewing Brian Quail. He's a CEO of Quail Consulting, but this is after 25 years in the 40 years in the nonprofit space, 25 years as a CEO, and now he's an author. He just wrote the book, The Ultimate Guide for New Nonprofit CEOs. It's sure to be a wealth of information, so please enjoy this podcast interview with Brian. Hey, I want to jump in real quick. Somebody asked me the other day, what does the Corley Company do? Well, we do three things for nonprofits. One, we facilitate meetings, yes, like board retreats where we discuss governance and strategy with all the members of the board. Number two, advise CEOs and help them as they make decisions and implement actions to drive their mission. And then finally, we produce podcasts such as this one, but also for a number of nonprofits to help you get the word out, get your message out. So if you're interested in any of these services, please feel free to reach out to Michael at thecorleycompany.com. Now back to the podcast. On this week's episode of the I-501C, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I have the pleasure of interviewing Brian Quail, Quail Consulting, who's got a long history in the nonprofit sector. And then he did something crazy. He went and wrote a book. And we're going to talk about that book today. It's going to be a great resource for new CEOs. But Brian, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to ask you, would you just share with the audience a little bit about yourself and how you came about to writing the book, and tell us a little bit about your history in the space?
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you and Reed having me on today. It's an honor and a pleasure, and really admire the work you're doing trying to get out great content to board members and CEOs and their staff. It's much, much needed. So thank you for that. For me, I was in the nonprofit space for 4 decades. 25 years as a president CEO of 3 different organizations. Was with the United Way Network for 17 years, 9 as a fundraiser, 8 as a CEO. And then moved from there to Louisville area chapter of the American Red Cross, where I was there about 7 years, and did humanitarian work, and was there at the time of Hurricane Katrina and all those events that took place. And then I transitioned into Boys and Girls Clubs of Broward County work, was there 11 years. And, the theme that I came after I stepped away in June of 2020 was really looking at, over the history of my career, what I had done and the things that I helped with, I raised over $1 billion as a part of my role over those 4 decades, helped millions of people. And then I thought, one of the things that I always did a lot of was to mentor new leaders coming in. And the reason for that is I had these 5 frameworks that when I started a new role, I enacted these frameworks. And my first initial job, which you'll get a kick out of, is that when I graduated from the University of Chicago, from at that time was called the School of Social Service Administration, SSA, I actually took a job with the Bureau of the Budget in the state of Illinois as a human services budget analyst. Michael, it became the pivotal point for me of putting together an analytical foundation that was second to none, I feel, in my career, that I would later use in developing these 5 frameworks, putting together proposal requests, working with board members, donors, you name it, and especially clients. And so over the course of all this, I had the time. I never thought I'd write a book, but I sat down and wrote a book. And one of the things that I wanted to concentrate in on was that first year of being a CEO. And in doing my research, I found that in the Harvard Business Review, there was an article, and it said that 1/3 to 1/2 of new CEOs will fail in the first 18 months in their role on the job as a CEO. And
that's remarkable.
It just was kind of hit in the face, right? And a lot of it has to do with boards thinking when they hire a CEO that there's nothing else that they need to do. They found their person with the skills. We're all set. Let's go. And as I dug deeper, found that 18 to 22% of the annual churn of people leaving the nonprofit sector at the time was happening. 5 to 6 years is an average now of a nonprofit CEO's length of service. And then throw in the dynamic of 10,000 baby boomers will retire daily up until 2030, which means not only are we losing CEOs, we're losing people at the C-suite area who are that age, right? And then, more importantly, speaking to our board members here, we're going to see a transition of board members not volunteering as much as they did because they're, like many others, and they're done that. It's time to give somebody else a shot, right? So, with all that said, I thought to myself, hey, I think I got a topic here. One of the other things that became paramount is that when I looked at a board member's tenure of service, traditionally, as you know, you look at really board service of being 2-3 year terms and then a break, if you know what I mean. So if the average is 5 to 6 years and you're going to be a board member for a total of 6 years, there's a good chance that you're going to be onboarding a new CEO, unless you can stem the tide and really work with them and to help them as they come on board in their first year. So the Ultimate Guide for New Nonprofit CEOs is really the book that I put out there, and I got it out there in May of 2023. So end of this month is my 1 year anniversary.
Congratulations. Yes.
A benchmark. And I'm still around to talk about it, and people are interested.
And you're still smiling.
I'm smiling, and I'm doing presentation. I'm working with clients, but specifically those who are starting their tenure. And I tell you, it's so needed, because when we recruit board members, and this isn't a slight on board members, but it's a fact, we're not hiring board members for their HR skills or onboarding skills of executives. We're usually recruiting them to help in fundraising. They believe in the mission, a lot of other things. And the top 7 items on Board Source in their most recent impact survey of 2021, it's nowhere to be found. So I thought, hey, okay, sit down, write this book. Took me a little over 2 years to write because I wanted to do it well.
Wow.
Was caring for my wife at the same time, along with my daughter, who were just like, Dad, honey, you got to write this book because it's so important. So a shout out to them, because without them, it's like you said, it's a good thing I'm still smiling. But anyway.
Well, I'm glad they encouraged you to do that. I'm glad you came on the show. So I want to dive into the book, and I love the title. It's very descriptive, The Ultimate Guide for New Nonprofit CEOs. Love it. So you've got these 5 frameworks. You developed them for yourself, and now you are able to, and you help mentor people using those frameworks. And now you've written the book. So let's go through these. And I love the first one, 90 days. The first framework is 90 days. Tell us, what is that, Brian?
What that basically means is, what are you going to do in your first 90 days? So I call this a time of discovery, is what your first 90 days should be about. So you're learning the strengths and weaknesses of your organization. And I devote 6 chapters of the book to this one topic, to this first framework of 90 days. And what I basically say is, you have to go beyond the 4 corners, the 4 walls of your office, and to get out there and meet face to face. And you got to do questions to your management team. You got to get out there and talk to funders. And so, as an example, I'll give you this example. When I took over the United Way position, my first CEO experience, I put the stake in the ground and said, I am going to go out and visit the 78 agencies that we were providing funding to for over 100 programs in the community. And it was a tri-county area. So what happened was, I set this audacious goal, let people know about it. Half the staff thought I was crazy. Mm-hmm. Board members didn't know what to think. Donors and funders were going like, well, this is a different approach. Here's a guy who's used to fundraising, but now instead of jumping in right on that right away, he's learning the landscape of the community, his agencies. And so what actually happened is that I went and met with people on their turf and their terms. And the richness and the information I pulled back was incredible. I learned things about my board volunteers, about my organization, about the staff that people love, and the staff that were kind of like, oh, not so much. But it gave me a great sense of understanding and learning. And because I was covering a tri-county area, it also helped me to understand the fabric of the community and the differences within each county that our programs are funding and doing. Also, during that 90 days, I was asking a lot of questions. And so literally, there is one chapter that all I do is lay out questions for the management team. And so if you're a new CEO, and I define new as, that range of 1 to 3 years, even if you're past your 90 days, pick up this book because there are nuggets in here that's going to help you so much. Also, a part of it is, the big part was also, how am I going to communicate with my board? What's the protocols? Who sets the agenda? Who really runs the meeting? What's the personality? And then I kind of do a thing where on each interview I always had a board member that was honest enough to say, if we were able to get more people to fill their roles and do their work, we'd be much more successful. So I developed a thing called the board scorecards. And it was basically aligned with time, talent, and treasure, the 3 T's. And looking at the 3 G's of give, get, or go, and really kind of said to board members, hey, if we want to be successful, we need to have standards for you. We need a job description. You need to understand what you need to do. But more importantly, as if I'm going to be your new leader, I need your help. And I wasn't bashful to ask for the help. But I will say that in each circumstance, in the beginning, it was kind of like the thing of, glad you're here. They threw you the keys. We'll see you next month. And,
Sure.
We got to stop that as a sector to our leadership. Because if we don't, we're going to see more exodus of great people. And boards need to kind of re-engage and help. And I know they're volunteers, and I respect the heck out of them. But they have, I think, energy to give, and that's why they're serving, because they care about mission.
Yeah, so, like you said, a good CEO also, and I like the way you framed this, no pun intended, is will engage the board, and you set those expectations. And so what I heard you say with those first 90 days, lay that foundation, small f, that foundation that's really going to pay off in spades and dividends for years and years to come. So I'd love that as a first foray, if you will, for the new CEO. So now you talk about number 2 in the frameworks is your team. Analyzing or looking at your team. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so looking at what I like to say is the frameworks 2 through 4 are really analyzing and understanding what you have. So what I did was to really start to evaluate my direct reports and those underneath them, because, as you're born into a family, when you're a CEO, you get what you get from the past leadership. And so what you have to do is you really have to go in there and look at and understand, do you have the talent that's going to take you to meet the vision of what you see for the organization and why they hired you? And so literally in this framework, I kind of go into how you ask those questions. And in chapter 5 of this framework of framework 1, that's where I lay out all the questions for every direct report. And there's about 15 to 20 questions in each. And while that seems daunting, it's not, because what you're doing is delegating and you're asking questions. So while I was out on the road, I had my team collecting the information, and then we had one-on-one meetings. So when I met with my team, I would say, okay, I want it in writing. Why? Because then I get to see what their skill set was for writing. 2, instead of me reading it, I'd say, we're going to have a conversation, but you're going to present this as if you were going to present it to the board. So what did I get there? I got to see how people were comfortable in getting up in just even a one-on-one meeting and explaining what they have. And so I started to learn about their skill sets. And I could see their passion, or maybe not so much, or, hey, were they going to drink the Kool-Aid or not, right? So And then the other thing that kind of came into this is that I also gained information from board members and about my team. And things that, Michael, I'd sometimes learn is that I would have board members say to me, yeah, so and so who's on the team, we almost decided to maybe show them the door, but we decided to leave that to you until you came on board, and you need to make that decision. And in some cases, I thought to myself, gee, you had the information. Why didn't you? Because instead I had to take the time to reorganize and do, right? And then other times they totally missed the mark. And I'm glad they didn't. So as a good leader, you have to go in there and evaluate. And that's what this framework on getting to know your team. And then I'd also look at the next level of people. And I wanted to know how they were supporting their leader, because then what I found out, who are my stars for the future? And if somebody left unexpectedly, and which there were people who did, then I would know, do I have the bench strength to possibly make a move or to do a search, but make sure that the bench gets included? So, this is where this framework becomes really key, because in the 1 year period, I say this in the book, in the first year, you're working on the business, working in the business, excuse me. After year one, you have to work on the business, because if you don't start doing vision, strategy, you're kind of toast, right? But in that first year, you got to make sure you have the right people, right seats, right energy. And it may take you a little longer to get what you want, but I think it becomes paramount in how you want to really be a good change agent for your organization. And so that was really important for me.
Boy, that makes sense. And that intentionality, it almost gives you permission for that first year to really look in the business, because you're torn, you're pulled every which way, I can imagine, as a new CEO from outside forces.
And the good thing about what I'm suggesting is that I did it 3 times. And so the book, when it says for the guide for the new CEO, well, guess what? Every time you go to be a CEO, you're new again.
Well stated.
And so this book is for everybody. And this book is also a great tool for board members and staff to understand how they need to support their leader.
Oh, very good.
So framework 3 is one that I tackled because I really felt that it was important. And framework 3 is called the financials.
Yeah, I want to hear you get into this, because I can't tell you how many people, and you know what I'm going to say, I don't understand financials, I don't like them, but you got to.
You got to. And thank you for that tee up, because what I believe is important is that each leader comes in with a very well-defined set of tools that they're good at. And unless you're a CFO, you're probably not a numbers person. I was very different because I worked in a budget shop in the first 3 years of my career. So I knew enough to be dangerous. I knew the questions to ask. So for the financials, it's basically me saying to people is analyze the numbers and the historical story of the numbers about your organization. And so look at what's happening with the cash flow. Are you using a line of credit, and why and when? What does payroll look like? What are the things that you need to understand? What's the timing of billing for grants and programs that you have operating? And the most important thing here too is to understand your financial team. Do you have a good, staff leader in that area that can support you? And the other thing that I kind of raised the flag in this one is board members are very important. Board chairs are very important. My bias is finance chairs are critical. And the reason why is that I always made sure I had a well-trained finance chair, somebody who I would love to find that CPA who was, with an auditing firm who, wasn't doing our books, but was ready to kind of pitch in and help out, or knew the difference between nonprofit accounting and private accounting, right? And those GAP principles, the generally accepted accounting principles, were really important to understand as a new leader. And so I tell people, lean into the areas where you're not strong. And what this section does is I basically provide a guide for new CEOs that's pretty in depth. And I'm not turning people into CPAs. I'm just asking them, ask these questions, ask these numbers. And I'm currently working with someone right now, and that's what they did when they went in. And what they found were contracts that people had been going on and didn't understand what was behind them, right? They didn't realize that there are certain dates that are critical for them to meet. This CEO has uncovered it and has kind of brought it up to the front and saying, hey, no wonder why cash flow is delayed, because we're not billing on a timely basis, right? So it's all those things. And that's what a new leader can do, is come in, ask questions, do things, but lean into those items that, you don't do well. And if you are a program person, great, you're going to be good in that. But, if you didn't fundraise, you got to learn how, because what I say here is that each discipline that's reporting to you, the top person goes, what are you going to do? And how do you fill that? And that's where your board can really help you in a lot of ways. And that's why the finance chair for me wasn't a figurehead position. I made sure they saw the monthly financials when we closed the books. Before we went to board meetings, they gave the report, not me. I maybe wrote it for them, but then we sat down with my CFO. We talked through it. If things were, timing was up and we were great, looking good, was it a timing issue? Did we really kind of get something we didn't think we'd get? So that's what I kind of do in this section for our new CEOs. Framework 4 is called donor relationships. And here, what I do is I take a different approach, or at least I think it's a different approach. And I basically say to the person, sit down and understand your portfolio of revenue that you currently have, and break it down. And, I always use the income statement from the previous board meeting to start this analysis. And, the old grants and individual donations from others, it's a huge line. So what I did was to go in and say, let's break each line down. How many and I illustrated in the book, it's a $7.1 million line. Okay, of that $7 million, how much is grants? How much is coming from individuals? Let's peel back the onion and really understand what we have. In the events side, how is, that budget being put together? Is, there's gross and then there's net, and net is what you spend. So I don't really care about the gross. I want to know about the net, because that's what's going to provide services in the community. And then, are there transactional relationships that you have in the organization in terms of raising money? In Red Cross terms, it was, CPR and first aid courses, blood pathogen courses, right, that we would do. And they were really needed in the community. Certain businesses required it for their employees to stay current on those things. So that's transactional revenue. There's a difference. So, how are you going to use that? And in each one, I always, over the course of my 40 years, I never had a volunteer say to me, and I never said to a volunteer, oh yeah, this year economy's great and we're gonna raise a bunch of money. Instead, what I usually heard, particularly from volunteers, is if it was a good year, well, I think people are going to hold on to their cash to decide what they're going to invest into. Or if it was a bad year, it was like, well, don't expect much from us for us, because, man, there's not much out to be had. So, it was always this thing where, doom and gloom. So I took the opposite approach, Michael. I always had the abundance mindset. And to say to my team and to say to volunteers, look, there's money out there. Our job is to go find it. And guess what? You get to become my treasure hunters. Help me to find the treasure that I can find in the community. And this whole thing lately, I'm showing my age, I guess. And I don't consider myself that old, but the thing is that I hear these discussions sometimes on other shows of, yeah, board members shouldn't be helping you raise money. And I look at that and say, what? You got to be kidding me. They're the ones who can help to set the table. They may not want to ask for the order, but that's why you're there. But you need them it's relationship business. Because in this business, I always like to remind people that people give to people, not to organizations. Mm. And it's because of the people who are working in those organizations that others decide to join. And while the mission is great, don't get me wrong, they want to see the numbers. They want to know if you got that charity navigator, designation, which I was proud to have for, my 11 years at Boys and Girls Club. Every year I was there. Those are important things, but you got to know who has the head and the heart story or both. And so how do you put that together? And the one thing I always made sure of is that I wanted to make sure that I provided mission moments in every board meeting.
I love it.
To get that client to do these things. But these frameworks are really positioned because boards just don't know how to guide their new CEOs. So I'm trying to be helpful to provide these frameworks to create a path and a guide for folks to really understand that and see that. The last framework is titled The Who.
And I assume not the rock band.
Well, I love them, but it's not. But it's about bringing everything together that you just analyzed in the first four frameworks. And one isn't one right after the other. Some of this is happening all at the same time. But, my thing here is that, I say to folks, you've done the analysis, you've met with the funders, you've talked to your board, you know the direction that you want to go in, and the promises that you made. So how do you bring this together? So for me, again, example, with Boys and Girls Club, we had 12 freestanding clubs. When I first started, there were 3 clubs that kids were getting snacks at and 9 locations that weren't. And what I learned is that we had 3 dedicated volunteers that were helping to secure resources to make sure kids had a snack when they came from school. Because what we found that kids were getting lunch, or at least the elementary schoolers and middle schoolers, between 10:30 and 11 o'clock. And then when they get to the club, 1:30, 2 o'clock, they haven't had anything to eat. So guess what? If you've got the hangries, you're not going to listen to, the staff or the volunteers who are trying to make your day a nice day after a long day at school. So long and the short of it, I found a way in the beginning to find how we were going to provide the resources for the 9 other clubs, and we did that. But the bigger question on the who was, why was the snack and why was the food so important? We needed to learn something about the kids and their environment. What we found out, obviously, most of our families were living in school in food deserts. So there wasn't a Publix nearby. It was more of the fast foods, 7-Eleven types of stores. No disrespect to any of those businesses, all good, all needed. But in communities, there's not those big box stores that exist. And people didn't have the resources to purchase the food that was good for their kids to eat. So what we did was to develop a strategy. And in 2010, under the Obama administration, when President Obama signed the after-school meal program, we were the first club in Florida and the first after-school program in Florida to actually start what was then called the after-school meal program. So I went through and talk about this in the book. And how I learned about this was actually in my first 90 days. Because why? The clubs that didn't have the snack to begin with were saying to me, all right, new leader, Mr. Quail, what about us? How are you going to, we want the kids to have a snack too. And I said, okay, we made it happen. And then when we brought the food on, then it was, oh gosh. So that becomes understanding your who and the background of why you do things, right? Um, and I give some other examples, and I have case studies in here for people to look at. And one is even on a capital, campaign that we did, and why it was important to our who. And I kind of lay out there the importance of all this.
Sure.
And if there's one thing that I think that is really important for the leaders of today, is that there's been so much stripped out over the course of time when I look back at my career. I worked for organizations at the time that valued having leadership programs,
Yes.
training. A lot of that doesn't exist anymore. Now we've got it's almost like we're recreating it. And here you go.
There you go.
Here's my recreation of what I believe becomes really important for volunteers and staff to get behind and to understand. And one question I'm always asked, and it seems like I haven't let you talk too much, but you can see the passion I have here is, I have people ask me, so, am I going to be successful if I follow your 5 frameworks? And my response is, yeah, you're going to be successful because I was successful, but under one condition: simple isn't the same as easy. It's simple for me to say follow the 5 frameworks, but it's not going to be easy. But if you follow them, you will be successful. And, I always left an organization better than I found it, not because it was because of me, but it was because of how I believe I built teams of people, of volunteers and staff that got excited about what we were doing and would propel the mission upward in a trajectory that we could all be proud of. I just had the steering wheel, but other people would give me directions and guides. But I also saw my big role of clearing the roadblocks for people, right? Take away the roadblocks so people can do their job and try to get them out of their silos. And that was the same for volunteers too. I had volunteers that loved this particular program. And gee, that's good, but guess what? If we don't have the rest of this side of the operation running, what you love maybe won't exist, right? So that's kind of all the great things I've been up to trying. And I want to say that being an author is one thing. Now, promoting your book and trying to get it in the hands of people is quite another. And I'm a one-person show. You're blessed to have Reed and your team and what you do. I'm envious, but after 40 years in the nonprofit sector that treated me so well, I felt like this is my time as a pay it forward. And and the people that I am working with now and helping, I'm making a difference, and it's making a difference in another way. And I feel like Johnny Appleseed, throwing out the apple seeds and trying to plant the trees for future growth. So there you go.
Well, you are certainly doing that, Brian, author of The Ultimate Guide for New Nonprofit CEOs. Nothing like lived experience to share with everybody. And I can't thank you enough for going through those frameworks. This book has got to be compelling and so helpful. Any final words, Brian, you'd like to share with the audience? Maybe where can they get the book?
Yeah, thank you. If they go to brianquail.com, they can go to my website, one, to learn more about me, two, to buy the book. The book is on Amazon. I just refreshed the website to include reviews from Amazon. So people, for those doubting Thomases, my middle name is Thomas, so there you go, that they can go to the website, see the reviews that are there. Also, to make it easier for people, podcasts that I've been fortunate enough to get on, like this one, I'm posting them on the website and directing the link back to you all to give you all credit and a thank you for doing your work and doing what you're doing, because I just feel that that's really important. And my consulting is obviously very niche in nature because I'm really trying to find and help those new CEOs that are first coming in. But I'm finding I'm doing more than that now because of the topics and because of what's going on. And so, yeah, I just feel just really great about, what I'm trying to do here for the sector like you're doing. And so I hope that helps. And go to LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. That's my main driver. So LinkedIn, my website, and people can get a hold of me at brianquail.com. And then my email address is bq@brianquail.com.
Yeah, and that's Quail, Quail, brianquail.com. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the I-501CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members. Everybody else, go buy the book.
Thanks, guys.
What an interview with Brian Quail. Now, here we have it, recapping with Reed. Reed, give it to us, 3 points.
So right at the very beginning, Brian provided some interesting statistics saying that most nonprofit CEOs are going to average around 6 years in that CEO seat. Most board members are going to serve 2 3-year terms. So theoretically, there's a pretty good chance you are going to be in charge of hiring a new CEO at some point during your board tenure.
Yeah, absolutely right. Number 2.
The board's role is not complete when they hire the CEO.
And what do you mean by that?
I mean that the board has to help onboard the CEO, bring them along. You can't just, sign the contract and then see him at the next board meeting a month from now, especially the board chair.
Yeah, and oftentimes, unfortunately, that's what happens. There is no onboarding process. So this book can certainly serve as a guide and to help both parties, as a matter of fact. And number 3.
And the classic saying of in year 1, you work in the business. After year 1, you work on the business.
Yeah, the first year is a year of grounding, and he eloquently stated that. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, recapping with Reed after our discussion with Brian Quail on the I-501CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, and we'll see you next week.